Welcome to VINTed with Scout Driscoll. Come along with me on my journey into the wine world, where I share thoughtful conversations with wine industry leaders. Get ready for marketing insights from branding and design to sales and social media, and the answer to the ultimate question: what moves wine? Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Scout Driscoll, founder of Vint Studio and host of VINTed, where I ask top leaders in the wine industry, how do you move wine? Past guests include folks like Amy Tromp-Miller, founder and CEO of Common Fuel Consulting, and Amanda Wurzbach of Total Dish Branding and Messaging, also Vince's dedicated brand strategist. I'm so excited for you to join us today for an episode all about data, leveraging quantitative and qualitative data to help wineries really understand their target audience and affect everything from design to packaging to experiences in the tasting room. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Vint, where rich storytelling meets smart design. At Vint, our studio goes beyond the label, guiding wine brands through strategy-rich branding and packaging evolutions. Our work with Cooper's Hawk has helped them grow the nation's largest wine club with over 450,000 members. You can learn more about Vint at vint.studio, or for a free label audit for your brand, contact me directly at hello@vint.studio. I am so excited for you guys to meet two of my favorite powerhouse strategists, Faith Hurley and Stacy Caligan of PinPoint Collective. PinPoint is a female-owned, equity-centered innovation firm based here in Chicago with us. They believe that great design starts with great research, and so do I. Co-founders Stacy and Faith live a mission to advance underrepresented audiences through both quantitative and qualitative research in order to incorporate those valuable voices into the design process, allowing perspectives, context, and needs to directly influence impactful goals and outcomes. Welcome to the show, Stacy and Faith. I'm so happy you guys are here.
Thank you for having us.
So Stacy and Faith, I'm so happy to have you guys. I want to talk all about data and how wineries can leverage data to grow their brands. So I mentioned in your bio that leveraging quant and qual research to affect design processes and, of course, clients' goals is super important. Could you guys break down, though, for the average layperson, like what does quant and qual even mean?
Such a great question. And in the simplest of terms, we describe quantitative as the numbers, as the data, as all of the statistics that we can pull on people. But on the qualitative side, that is where we uncover the why behind that data. So often, I mean, even as we're moving throughout the world, there's a lot of things that we don't capture as ourselves, right? And so one of my favorite examples is we were working for a hospital, for a healthcare client. And we had done a survey to kind of understand how nurses were consuming in the hospital, in the cafeteria. And what we heard in that survey was that all of them wanted healthy items. We want salads. We want to make sure that we're getting all of our nutritions in our day. But when we actually went and spent time in the cafeteria, it was completely different than what we saw in that survey, because what we uncovered was after a super stressful day, they just wanted comfort food. So they were going to grab a burger. They were going to grab, like all of the maybe unhealthy things that they said that they wanted in the survey, just because when, we're thinking about a moment in our lives and we're jotting that down, it can be at a very different moment than when you are in that behavior and making those decisions. So we really use quantitative to help us identify what we call the haystack of the problem, but then we use qualitative and go out and interview and use ethnographic research to find that needle within the haystack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to just kind of build on that, again, I always really oversimplify. I mean, we're geeks for the data, right? Like that's where you can really be guided to understand the kind of either trends or human behaviors that are out there. And so in the end, though, they're only numbers, and we're not numbers as humans. We're complex. We're layered. We make decisions based on our emotional attraction to something or retention to something. But we always say the numbers keep us honest. Like that is the North Star that we can head towards. So if I were to put it into your audience's terms, we can understand, great. We can scrub the data, all of that, every time you hand over your grocery card number, that code is red for something. Every time we're on Google and we're searching things, all of that data exists, and we can start to synthesize it down matching alignment to the goals that we're trying to solve for. So again, we would start to look at data that talks about, household income, what their food and beverage spend is, what is their restaurant experience and spend, because that helps us narrow in on not only is there a market share within this demographic or generation or target region that we're trying to understand, but are they willing to spend money on wine, right? Those are some of the qualifiers we'd start to narrow in on. And once we understand, okay, there's a market share here, we can go a layer deeper and we can say, and guess what? Within these certain segmentations, they're drawn to some particular brand or type of wine, for example. That's awesome. Now we have our haystack. Now we have some numbers to guide our decision making, but it still doesn't tell us the why. Like, why is the segmentation drinking Riesling more than they drink Sauvignon Blanc, or this brand versus that brand? And that's where we really want to add in the qualitative so that we can get down to what are the why behind the needs and modes and motivations that then influence their purchasing criteria and their driving behaviors, right? Because that's where true differentiation can happen. Because if all of our competitors are all looking at the quant, they're doing really smart work because that means they're looking at it versus just like the operational lens of things that we typically look at. But if that's all they're going to do, everyone's going to be looking at some subset of data, and it's not going to allow the freedom for innovation or better branding or better communication or better touch points, because it's still only number driven. And that's where the art and science comes in, with working like great partners with you that understand that, and others that can help bring that insight from a data and qualitative perspective and say, okay, well, what can we do with this now? Now that we know them, how do we want to show up for them?
Yeah, it almost reminds me of online dating, where like the quant is the profile and you swipe left or right and you get all the facts and figures, but the date is where you really get to know them. So, that qualitative experience is when you actually sit down and begin to speak with people about why they behave certain ways, how it fits into their lifestyle. And I know I can say in our work together, I've really loved how you get so granular with people. Do they have kids? Why are they so tired? Like there's so many opportunities to really understand not just who someone is, but their lifestyle. And, in my episode I just recorded with Amanda Wurzbach, our dedicated brand strategist for Vint, she and I talked a lot about, going beyond lifestyle, but part of that lifestyle element is how people engage with other brands, with other categories. How do you kind of build a bigger picture? And so I love that your research not only gives us what's happening on Nielsen and different, purchasing behaviors, but actually allows clients to really get into that, a date with their consumers.
Yeah.
And so that's so relevant. So now that we've kind of defined quantitative and qualitative, can we talk about design thinking and what that means to you and how your company, tell me more about PinPoint and kind of like what is design thinking and how do you guys structure your collaborations with clients around that, philosophy?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'll take this one. So design thinking, I feel like, is a very buzzy word right now. And that's got good and bad connotations, right? That means more people are getting educated that this is an approach to solving your business needs, which amen to that. But also it can start to be a little bit butcherdized in terms of what does it really mean? And there are way more brilliant people out there that have written brilliant books, and there's classes and certifications and all of that. So look into all of that. Our oversimplified way of saying it is that through the quant and qual lens, we bring consumers' voices to the table. Because in the end, we can no longer, if we've learned anything in the last year and a half, we can't have leadership sitting around a table making assumptions of what they think people want. Why not go out and actually do the work to understand what people want and need and the workarounds that they've created, because there's not a solution there for them. And so again, through this way of quant and qual, like you discussed, understanding their lifestyle is a key component to understanding what they need. Because if they have X amount of kids, we can start to unfold that seamlessness is probably really important to them. And time is probably really important to them. And self-care, if they can squeeze it in anywhere, is important to them. But those are the nuances that we can start to unpack and make sure we're bringing those voices to the table so that Of course, every organization, every company, every business should be looking at it through the more typical business lenses of feasibility and viability, right? So supply chain and bottom line and operations and like that has to be there. And it's a dire part of the equation. But design thinking to us is just introducing a third lens, just introducing another tool to those two kind of buckets in order to make sure that through the viability and feasibility that as the organization and as our clients are experts at, are we aligning that with actually what your target audience wants and needs from you? And if we look through all of those lenses, then there's ROI to be had. It's almost impossible for it not to be had then, because we're showing up in a manner via the channels we could, well, let me take a step back, because we actually like understand who we're serving at a level that is far beyond numbers, far beyond, hey, operationally, this is how we execute on X. No, now we know them. We know the channels in which they want to be reached, and we know how and why they want us to show up for them. And so all of that information is, I mean, there's no stone left unturned. And so then again, if we can deliver on all three of those lenses and ensure that design thinking, so again, just oversimplified, understanding your target consumer, making sure you're showing up for them in the manner that they expect and need, and actually differentiate from that, then fantastic. That's how I would describe design thinking.
Well, and I love how too, beyond just like who you're targeting, you've also done a lot of research on what actually happens and how do they actually engage with the brand when you do connect with that consumer. You know, so for example, for a winery, I could imagine like, you know, understanding what happens when someone leaves the tasting room, or why are people abandoning carts? You know, like there's so many opportunities to really dig into the kind of scary part of what are the results of all of the work that you've put into this, from grape to production to sales, that very last moment someone engages with, or even like how someone engages with your sales collateral. You know, I know right now we're working on a project together where you're doing a massive audit of an 85-person sales team, and how can we better create collateral to serve that team? And how is that collateral they have being, taken by their clients and potential clients? And to have the actual data on that is so invigorating. Mostly because we didn't design the sales collateral to begin with. Just kidding. If it was like, hey, check out how ours is performing. No, but it is just so helpful to know the reality and to have that to be completely naked in a way for a brand, to really be naked and vulnerable and to see the reality of how they're engaging clients. So our customers, as I really, really like that. So of course, one of the reasons I was super excited to have you on the show too, is that I've seen your work in action. And at Vint, we love knowing how our designs will be effective because they're based on not only emotion-rich strategy, but the actual data. And for example, right now we're working on designing kind of a better for you adult beverage product line. And it hasn't launched yet, so it's very #NDA. But, we got to the point where, all of our instincts for what was going to happen for this product line had to be gut checked, because it's a really revolutionary product. And we were super excited about how we're going to engage with new audiences. And it got to the point, though, where I realized that the team we're working with, that all of us were in a little bit of a gray area. And in our assumptions, we're all Gen X, and everyone on the team is a Gen X person, and we're all aging. And in a way, thank you. I forgot this is a video podcast. For those of you listening on just audio, we are free bombshells.
Sure are.
But we realized there was a little bit of myopia in our own perspective. So that's when I engaged PinPoint Collective to help us understand, in the better for you beverage category, how are people open to it, or like how much risk is there, and who are we targeting? Because we're really starting from scratch with this brand. So I would love to talk a little bit more about how your work with the data really inspired a pivot in that project, and how your work came to life through that one.
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of kick this off, and then on the one side of the spectrum, and then you can talk to the other side of the spectrum. But we typically engage with clients. There's a range of industries that they come to us from. There's a range of problems or opportunities they're trying to solve or learn more about. But what we've understood is there's kind of this emotional spectrum that they're on. And of course, it's wide and vast, and people land all across the spectrum. But to kind of dramatize what it is. On one side of the spectrum is a, oh no moment, like panic, to keep it PG. There'd be another word in there probably, or the aha moment. And that's where this client that we collaborated with was on. They had this aha that there was a need that could be solved. And they had a sense of it individually. They started to kind of check it out with friends and family, like, hey, is this something that would be good for you as well? And that's where it's incredible to work with clients that are coming into a space saying, hey, I think there's an under-delivered audience here. But like you said, because we're all of that same generation and have just naturally entrenched beliefs and biases that we can't remove ourselves from, it was really smart for you and them to say, hold on, let's go in with that working hypothesis. Let's test it and let's blow holes in it and see if it still stands at the end of it. And if it doesn't, who is standing at the end of it? And the really cool thing about the quantitative and qualitative lens of that project was, as you recall, we went out and guess what? Our generation that we were hypothesizing was going to be a segment was indeed a segment. But we going that layer deeper within that data and then that qual, they were a later adopter of it. So there was an opportunity then where all of us creatives and really smart people in a room could say, okay, cool. So we're not off base with these people, but their wants and needs for this product are different than others that also want and need it, but their modes, their choices, all of that, again, granular, nuanced things were going to be later in the adoption train. So with that information, then we could pivot who we wanted to show up for, who we wanted to launch with, how that comes to be, what's the messaging, what's the branding that aligns with why they were excited about this potential solution that's going to disrupt an industry and doesn't exist. And the education curve that would take for those adopters to be like, wait, it's a what? Because it just, if you're going to be new, you have to be ready to, toe the line of education and introduction and excitement. So I think the pivot that came was validation of the segmentation, but where in the adoption train did we want them to come with our strategy? And then also having that understanding on the upfront when you and Amanda and all of the other smart people in the room were saying, great, okay, if this is who we're going to target when we come out, and this is the audience, and this is how they want us to show up, but we don't want to lose sight that later down the path, we want to still capture them. So how do we do the branding and the messaging and the channels and touch points that doesn't then isolate them in the future either? So, I mean, that's incredibly powerful to know when you're coming to a market for the first time and have all of that information before you've spent time and money and resources launching a product. It's a really painful experience to watch people do it the other way.
Yeah.
And then to have what we call design directives or insights, and to have incredible talent like Vint and Total Dish to then be able to take that and go, oh my gosh, okay, there's the science. We will now bring the art, and here we go. Yeah. And the client to feel really confident that the work has been done. To understand why we're making the design decisions that we're making and who we're speaking to is really super cool. As you can tell, we can go on and on.
Please.
So there are so many moments in our work where I love kind of taking a step back and not being in the research and being, the interviewer, but instead being on the outside. And this was one of those projects that I try to do that as much as possible. And I think that I even learned that, I actually get like all of my greatest recommendations from my 20-year-old nephew. Like if you ask me that on a survey of how I get recommendations or how I find new things, I'd probably be like, I don't know, like I walk through a grocery store and maybe something pops out at me. But it's through this process that even for me, I begin to uncover those behaviors that's like, we can tap into that. If now we know that like, it is the 20-year-old nephew that's giving those recommendations, then we can look at how we design for that 20-year-old nephew to be spreading the word.
Or 20. We're going to pretend he's 21 for the sake of this. But I like you're talking about the you're talking about the like where people are in adoption, and really it was that while our target audience we assumed was open somewhat to this kind of product, there were certain things that they would be a little bit more there'd be more friction in getting them to adopt the product. Where we realized that just based on and it was really truly a blend of understanding the data of like what this typical audience does. I love how you named every psychographic and demographic and all of that as well. But there was one section, one sweet spot where not only were they more open to something that would improve their lifestyle, it was a better for you product, but they also weren't turned off by anything, considered diet. It was just such a, like, it was one of the Gen X people were like, well, I hate things that are diet. And it's like, me too. Yeah. So I had the same moment. But realizing that some people are earlier in that adoption, spectrum where they were much more open to the idea of anything that would allow their lifestyle to be enhanced. So it was just so eye opening. So we ended up moving the entire project, down a couple notches in age range, not because it was truly who we thought we would enjoy the product at the very end, but it was because we thought that they would be the ones to try something new and to engage with something new. And it also completely changed, the brand compass for this brand, whereas, before Better For You might have been, like, you'll have more energy or you'll feel better about yourself tomorrow. But now it was really about the concept of endurance and stamina and keeping parties going. And so it was just wonderful to see how that was so reflective we're so easy to reflect in the design and the strategy. So keep an eye out for our soon coming Better For You product coming out as completely evolved by PinPoint. So speaking of PinPoint, could you guys tell me a little bit more about your pins? And like, I love how you branded your services as these pins. Like, what's a pin and what does PinPoint mean? And can you walk me through that?
Faith always says it the best way. Just one day we locked ourselves in a room. So I'll take a step back, maybe about how like the two of us came to be and how we met and all that. We always joke that an actress and an architect walked into a bar and out came PinPoint. But the reality of the situation is we both came from incredibly different backgrounds that led us into this world of design thinking, which allowed us to really look at the practice in a very different way. So Faith came from acting. I came from architecture. And I mean, on Faith's side, using that skill set of her background in terms of being able to analyze human behavior and be able to empathize and sympathize with people in a very, very, very deep way through acting resonates so incredibly with our research and our strategy that we do right now. And then me on the design side of things, being an architect, so everything we do in the world takes place in space, right? It doesn't matter if it's me ordering wine online. That's still happening in my office of some sort, or when I'm drinking with friends, that is happening in an environment. And through the practice of architecture, I learned that what drew me to it was being able to impact humans in the world, not necessarily having to, put my name on the facade of a building and it being all about ego. I really wanted it to be about how can design impact humans' lives. So with our powers combined, we ended up working together through a couple of different companies, both on the consultancy side, within an agency, and through that evolved our practice until we decided there's something to everything that we've learned that we can approach design thinking in a different way than had been done in these large corporations that are primarily working with Fortune 500 companies. And we really thought there was a big opportunity to take those practices and evolve them for people and businesses like the ones that are listening right now, right? Like, how can we make an impact in the lives of a winery, of a female-owned business, of somebody local in Chicago that might not have the millions and millions and millions of funds, and nor do we necessarily need to help contribute to growing those Fortune 500's fortunes. So with that, we took our process and we locked ourselves in that room one day. And at the end of 8 hours, we came out with an entirely new business model, a name for our company, and these pins that you mentioned, Scout. And it all came from applying our process to ourselves. So we applied design thinking to design thinking.
Novel idea.
So meta.
So meta. And we uncovered that, there were a lot of pain points for the companies that we wanted to make an impact for, right? Like everybody wanted to make it different. They wanted to evolve their business. They wanted to grow ROI and show up for their customers in a very differentiated way. But they didn't want to do it for the huge dollar amounts. They didn't want to do it when it was incredibly nebulous and they didn't know what they'd be getting at the end. And they didn't know, how long it would take or what am I going to get as this output? Is it just going to sit on my desk and not, actually be useful to me? So that's where the pins came in. And we created these design thinking modules, which are each one individual module that allows us to look at quantitative separately than qualitative, separately than doing work sessions for your team. And then we can string all of those modules together to create a very customized approach to the multitude of clients that come to our door.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is, when we were applying design thinking to design thinking, it was, all of the points that Stacy said in terms of like, okay, well, maybe I've never even done design thinking. Like, I don't even know what this is. So how can I just put my toe in the water without a 6-figure scope? And what if I already have some quantitative data? Can you take that and use that? So how could we show up and be as nimble as possible so that we could work with small business owners across the nation that might have some of the part of the equation, but not all of it, and string our pins together in a way that makes sense, whether it's only 1 pin, 2 pins, 12 pins to get to the goal that you need, but make sure it's the most effective, impactful, and most importantly, actionable plan at the end. We had seen too often when we'd work with clients that they were like, yeah, we engaged, put big name firm here for design thinking. And we have these books just sitting on our desks and we don't know what to do with it, or we don't have the time or whatever it might be. So we really did look at that client engagement from pre-sales. When did the wheels always fall off? Well, it was because they didn't even know what they were paying for or what the output, or it was going to take 3 months just to do research before they even got something tangible. So really looking at that client journey from start to finish as we would with anything, as we would with any consumer journey, and trying to solve where there were barriers. How could we show up in a different way?
I love that. And I think that's such a great model for wineries in terms of, how to really think from the very beginning, every step of the way, what are those pain points for your consumer? How can you analyze where they're falling off or where you're losing opportunity to go? And of course, my answer often lies in design.
Well, and that's a huge piece of it.
But, we were just talking about the other day how when Amanda was on the show about how we had a client that was successful for 10 years, but had zero branding. They had a line out the door at their restaurant. People loved their food, but they had never put a message on the wall. They had a logo you couldn't read, a name you couldn't pronounce. And it was such a great case study for us because they had the product, like so many great wineries do, but they didn't have the brand. And after we gave them, a wonderful brand strategy and a completely new full circle brand for their packaging, their new store experience, we kept the name, but gave them a full new logo, updated their social media. When the whole brand was launched with a very specific strategy in mind, their sales skyrocketed by 40%. And it's like, this is, when you think about that customer journey and where people are kind of being stopped or where you're losing the opportunity to acquire new customers who don't know about you, who weren't, especially for smaller producers at your tasting room, or God forbid there's a global pandemic and travel gets completely stopped. So everyone's scrambling to get, online. It's just such a great opportunity to really pause and take a moment and think. And I think, one of my struggles in building my business for the last 20 years has been teaching clients when to pause and think, right? Like convincing people to take a moment and to do it right. And, our branding process takes 6 to 8 weeks because that's how you build the foundation and then support and then the first floor. And you end up at the very top with this amazing logo, but it has to be built in all that rich strategy. So whenever I meet other, dynamic, brilliant women who are also convincing people to stop and think, that's my go-to. I've started, I don't know if anyone else uses Slack, but in our Slack channel, everything is #dream team when I talk about PinPoint. So I am so
it makes us smile every time an email comes across or anything from you that way. Well, couldn't agree more. When we have great partners like yourself that have the ability to communicate to a client the need to pause and be strategic, because every client wants it yesterday. I'm the most instant gratification person you're going to meet, right? Like I want everything now. So I empathize with that, but to communicate to them the value of that foundation and the
ROI.
The long-term gains from an ROI and from a, launching pad for what the future of your company can be and your brand, is so valuable. And sadly, the opposite of that is a lot of time and money spent just kind of throwing things at a wall or just launching something. And then they come back to us at those moments. And you're like, oh, I wish you would have just took the time in the front end, because I guarantee it would have been more strategic and more impactful.
Or we have like awesome clients. Like I'm thinking of during the pandemic when Luminati's came to us. I mean, let's also talk about like best Chicago pizza ever. But they came to us and they were recognizing right away, like there is a major shift in human behavior right now in the pure fact that people cannot leave their homes and no longer are dining out. So all of a sudden, whether it is delivery, which pizza has always been known for, but even showing up for delivery was inherently changing during the pandemic, as was this whole new curbside aspect of, picking up and dining and getting your food and beverage. And they were super, super smart in, before making drastic changes, let's do it the right way. Let's invest in the research to really understand what is it that our customers and even the people that aren't currently showing up and purchasing Luminati's, what are they expecting so that we can exceed those expectations so we become their go-to, not only during the pandemic, but also once the world, begins to evolve, how can we evolve with them?
They were incredible with taking the notice of saying, is this just a Band-Aid solution for COVID, or is this going to shift human behaviors? And we want to be on the cutting edge if it's shifting human behaviors. And we want to invest our time and money and resources in the right way to show up for those consumers going forward. And again, adopt ones that might not have used us before, but now will, because of all of the operational keys that we put in place.
Yeah. And it's really, I love that they're thinking from the perspective of what revenue are we leaving on the table if we don't do this?
Yes.
And that's what's so hard often to convince clients. It's, thinking of what a case I just mentioned, like had they had done branding 10 years ago and built 10 years of brand equity and awareness of what they were doing, how much revenue do they leave on the table? I mean, that's 40% over 10 years. So it's an incredible investment for small businesses for sure. But I think there are certain opportunities to invest in bringing on smart individuals like yourselves and PinPoint and making sure you're taking the right steps forward so that growth chart doesn't, have a soft hill, but it's actually a mountain and allows people to really grow as well.
Yeah. We always, that point that you were talking about, we always talk to our clients about the cost of inaction. Like cost of inaction sometimes is far more drastic and dramatic than the cost of just pausing and getting ahead of it. It's a hard equation to crack, but when they can see real life examples and understand it. And again, I feel like the learning curve of that looks different now on the other side of a global pandemic, when the things that felt sure safe weren't so sure anymore. Now there's an understanding to maybe be more nimble.
I know I am. That's why we're sitting here. VINTed was born out of my, to a certain extent, my pandemic pivot. We have been working with Coupe Talk for almost 8 years, doing all their wine designs. We've done over 100 wine labels for them. But I was really nervous to start a wine-focused division because we're in Chicago. And, I don't know if you've noticed, there's not a lot of wineries in Chicago. I shouldn't say that. Terlatos in Chicago, they're huge. But, I was really nervous about, really pushing and marketing us as a wine design studio, even though we had done over 100 labels and won all these Harper Design Awards. And we're clearly, gifted at this. But when the pandemic highlighted some of my vulnerabilities and being so restaurant focused, I think we were like 60% restaurants at that point. It inspired me to rethink our process and how we connect with clients and what does our, marketing look like. And literally here we are today, not to get too meta, but because of, that that moment and that understanding that the pandemic brought to life for me as a business owner and growing into having a more diverse clientele. So amen to that.
Amen.
So I love to wrap up these podcasts with the same question, my final question. And for us, it's really, what is your number one advice to a winery for how to move wine? How do you increase sales? What is the one thing in your perspective that you would recommend?
I mean, I think we would both probably answer this in a very similar way. And I'm going to start by maybe reframing the question, because every single time we hear that, we put ourselves in the shoes of that person that that we're looking at that lens through. So I think for the wine industry, it's like, how can you as a winemaker, as a distributor, as whoever you might be,
sommelier,
who knows how might you move your wine in a more effective way, in a very different way, in a productive way? And I think, you all probably listening in, if you've listened to this far, you probably know what I'm going to say, which is to listen to your audience. I think that so often, us as business owners can do this too. We just so often can hone in on those two lenses, that Faith was mentioning earlier, that feasibility lens, the viability lens. It's what we're in the day to day. But if we can take a moment to really put ourselves in our audience's shoes and listen to what their needs are, it can completely open up new opportunities that us sitting around the table would never even come up with or think through. And that's where innovation happens. And I would encourage everybody listening to not only listen to the audience that you're currently serving, your current customers, which is incredibly important, but also to take an opportunity to identify what are the behaviors that your current customer is attracted to your business through, and then who are maybe some prospective audiences or customers that share those similar behavior types that can then even expand more so the audience that you're reaching and the customers that you're able to support and make an impact in their lives through, because that will continue to move your wine more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's so relevant now to wineries, especially as they're hoping to make that jump to younger millennials and Gen Z audiences. Gen X, what Gen X wants from a winery and a winery experience is very different than what a millennial wants, or a younger millennial. I know you guys will chastise me for saying millennial because there's like 17 different groups within millennials, but it really is, I think, as an industry, the wine industry is really looking to tap into more youthful audiences as the older audiences age out and travel less, or, et cetera. So it's really interesting to continue to encourage people to look at their audiences there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so I've been speaking to Faith and Stacy from PinPoint Collective. I'm so grateful to have you guys on the show today. I hope this has been insightful. Also, for those of you listening, there's a train that goes between our studios. And if you hear the train twice, it's because it goes past their office and then 5 minutes later comes past mine. Anyway, it's been such a pleasure. I am so lucky to know you, and I'm so happy to be able to share so other people get to know you too. So tune in for the next episode of VINTed, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Scout.
Bye, all. Tune in for the next VINTed. Subscribe today. For future episodes, marketing advice, and more, follow me on Instagram at Scout Driscoll. Learn more about VINT's design and branding services for wineries at www.vint.studio.